In the previous video, we have seen how to use aliases for simplifying the import statements and how to pass the environment variables into the application. In this video, we will see how to optimize the application for production. But before doing that, let's deploy this development version of the application to production so we can compare it with the production version. So, let's run the npm run build command to create a build, which will create the build files in the public folder. Now, build is created, let's deploy it to Netlify. Log into your Netlify account using GitHub. Click on Sites menu, click on Add New Site button and select Deploy Manually option. Click on Browse to Upload link and select the public folder to upload the files. Let's rename the application URL so it's easy to remember. We will name it Webpack-testing-demo-dev to indicate development version of the application. Now, let's open the deployed application URL in New tab so we can see it. As you can see, application is loaded correctly. And all the routes are also working. Even if I refresh any route, it still works without giving any error. Now, let's open the network panel. If I refresh the page, you can see the bundle.js file, which is of 836 KB in size for the loaded page, and the actual file size is 3.7 MB. And in the Sources tab, we can see the original source code. This is our bundle.js file, and we can also see the Webpack tutorial folder with all the files and folder structure of our application in original state. As you can see, the source code is displayed as it is, which is not good from security point of view, because anyone can see what APIs you're using, how you have created the code, and create exact same application as yours by just copy-pasting your code. So when you deploy your application to production, your original source code should not be visible to anyone. So we will see how to do that soon. Also, your application bundle file is 3.7 megabytes, which is too much because it contains the original source code. Until now, we were generating the build files in public folder. Let's change that. Let's first delete all the generated build files. So these are the only files we need in public folder. Now, we will create a new build folder instead of using the public folder. Let's execute the build script again and see what happens. As we're using eval source map, we see the original source code in development mode. As you can see, build folder is created with the build files. But it does not contain the index.html file which is required to run the application. So, in public folder, we have index.html file, but in build folder we don't have it. So let's see how to create that. We will create separate Webpack config files, one for development and another for production. For development, we will default back to the public folder. And I will rename this file as webpack.dev.js. Let me create a copy of this file and name it webpack.prod.js. For production file, we will use the build folder. Let's see what other things we need to change. For mode, instead of development, we can say production. And for production, we don't need the Webpack dev server, so let's remove the configuration for that. This eval source map should be used only for development, so let's see what we can use for production. Go to Documentation, Configuration, and click on DevTool option. Here, you can see we have a list of choices we can use. If you scroll down a bit, you can find hidden source map, which will not show any source code in the devtools. And yes means, this is for production. So let's use hidden source map instead of eval source map. As we have changed the config file names, we need to specify in scripts section which file to run for each script. For start script, we can say --config webpack.dev.js. And for production build, --config webpack.prod.js. Now, when we execute npm run build command, the prod config file will be executed. And in the build folder you will see the generated output. You can see the generated files now, but it still does not contain the index.html file. So, let's click on Guides and click on Production. To create the index.html file, we need to use this HTML Webpack plugin. So let's install that package first. Using npm install name of the package and -- save dev flag. Now, let's add the configuration required for that. We need to add this in the plugins array and only for the production file. Let's also import that package. And now, if you run npm run build command, you will see the index.html file created. You can see a new index.html file is created. If I format the file, you can see there is nothing in the body tag. So for every React application, we need a tag with ID root as you can see in the public folder. Only then your React application will work. You can also see bundle.js file script automatically added, which is good, but we need to have a root element in the body. So to fix this, we can create a new template.html file in public folder. Copy the contents from the index.html and paste it in that file. And now let's open the production Webpack config file. We can remove the title, and if you press Ctrl+space you will see suggestions. One of them is template option. We can provide that template file path here. So the template.html file will be used for creating the index.html file in the build folder. Now, let's run the build again. We currently don't have root element in the body, but once the build is done, we will see that added. If I format the file, you can see that we have a HTML element with ID root. If you check the script tags, you can see we have same bundle.js file imported twice, which is not correct. The first script tag is automatically created by HTML Webpack plugin, so we can remove the last script tag from template.html file. We will have that only in index.html file, which is for development environment. Now, if we run the build script again, we should not see the second script tag but only the first script tag with defer attribute. If I format the file, you can see only one script tag as expected. Now let's see what more we need to do to optimize it for production. We also need to add a clean property, which is important. So whenever we run build, we first need to clear out all the previously generated files and then create new files, otherwise we might have some unwanted files and we may face caching issues. So let's add this clean property inside the output property for the production file. So that's it for the JavaScript optimization. Now, if you check our previously deployed dev version, you will see that we don't have a separate CSS file created. You can see there is no CSS file. We only have bundle.js file. And inside the bundle.js file we have our CSS added, as you can see here. So if your bundle.js file is large, until your JavaScript file is not loaded, your CSS will also not load, which is not good user experience because until the JavaScript is loaded, user might see a blank screen without any CSS loaded. So we need to separate out the CSS from the bundle.js file, so we don't have to wait for JavaScript to load completely to see the CSS loaded. So to separate out CSS, you can click on Minimize CSS link and then click on Minimizing for production. So we need to use Mini CSS Extract plugin to separate out the CSS, which we can install it using npm install. We can also install this plugin to minimize the CSS code. And we will install them as dev dependencies. Now, we can copy this code to add it to our plugins array. So this plugin will extract the CSS from bundle.js file and will give some dynamic name for that generated file. We also need to add this loader configuration. If you remember from the first part of the Webpack series video, these loaders will be executed from right to left. So first Sass loader will be executed, then CSS loader will be executed, and then style loader will be executed. The job of style loader is to add all the application CSS inside the style tag of our HTML file, as you can see here. But now, we're creating a separate CSS file, so we don't need to use that style loader in the loaders array. Instead, we will use the extract plugin loader. Now we can copy the optimization property, which is used to compress the CSS file. You can add it anywhere in the list of properties, and we can also remove the commented code. We also need to import these two plugins in the file. Now, we can run the build command again. Right now, you can see we don't have any CSS file here. But after the successful build, you will see it created. Now, you can see we have main.css file and it's also minified, which is good to save some extra bytes so it will load quickly. And if I format the index.html file, you can see the CSS file reference is also added in this file, which is added because we use the HTML Webpack plugin to generate the HTML file. Now, we can deploy the generated build to Netlify again. We will create a separate site for production environment so we can compare it with the development version. So click on the Teams link and click on Sites, then add new site and deploy manually. Click Browse to upload link and select the build folder now instead of the public folder. Previous site we named as Webpack Testing Demo Dev. Now we will rename this site with prod suffix. Let's open it in New tab. So one site is for production mode and another is with development mode. Let's verify the production version now. As you can see, everything is still working as expected. Let's check the Network tab, and I will refresh the home page. As you can see, the bundle file size is less compared to the development version. The loaded file is 101 KB and the total file size is just 382 KB. If we compare it with the development version, you will see the difference. With development build, the loaded file size is 836 KB and the actual file size is 3.7 MB, which is too much as it also contains the original source code and CSS file content. And production file size is just 382 KB, which will load faster than the development version file. And if you filter by CSS, you can see we have a separate CSS file also, so it's not included in the bundle.js file anymore, which is good. If we check the Sources tab, you can see there is no original sources code now. While in development mode, you can see our entire source code as it is. If you check the bundle.js file in production site, you will see that it's a lot compressed and you cannot easily understand the code because it's now minified code. So this is production optimized code and will make your application faster to load. But there is one issue. If I go to any root other than home root and refresh the page, we get page not found error. This is because for development mode, we previously added history API fallback to fix this error with Webpack dev server. And we created an _redirects file in the public folder to fix that error for Netlify. But when we run build command, this file is not copied in the generated build folder. So in package.json file, we can add a script to copy that manually once the build is done. We can name it post-build script. And we can use cp command to copy that file. So we want to copy public/_redirects and add it to build folder. And we can execute this post-build script from the build command once the build is done using npm run postbuild. So right now, you can see there is no _redirects file here, but if I run the build script, it will be copied to the build folder from the public folder. As you can see, the file is copied successfully. Now, let's deploy the build folder again to Netlify and we should not get any error on refreshing any of the root page. Let's refresh the production site now. As you can see, it's loading correctly and all the roots are also working on page refresh without any error. Now, let's see how to use separate environment variables for each environment. Right now, we have only one .env file which we're using for development and production. Let's create copy of the .env file. Let's call it .env.dev. And we will add _dev at the end of the value so we can differentiate it. And we will call the other file as .env.prod. Here, let's add _prod at the end of the value. When we don't pass anything to the config method, the .env package uses .env file from the root of the project folder. But now we have changed the file name, so we can pass an object with path property. For the path, we can specify the name of the file relative to the current file. And for the Webpack dev file, we can use .env.dev. So this is how you can use different environment variable files for different environments. Now, let's run the build again. If you remember, we're already logging out the values of environment variables to the console in app.jsx file. Let's deploy it again to production environment. If we check the console now, we should see that updated environment variable values. So we're correctly using the production-related environment variables. Now, to verify the development environment variables changes, let's run the application using npm start command. And we can access the application on port 5000. So if I refresh the page, I'm able to see the dev-related environment variables values, which is as expected. So for development, we're using .env.dev file, and for production, we're using .env.prod file. Make sure to use the same environment variable name in both files with different values. Now, if you check the index.html file, we're using bundle.js file, but we don't have that bundle.js file in the public folder, so how the application is running locally without any issue? If I go to the browser and refresh the page, and let's filter it by bundle, you can see there is a bundle.js file. And we're telling Webpack to create that file in the public folder, but it's not created and still our application is working fine. This is because by default, Webpack Dev Server does not save the file on file system to speed up the development, otherwise it will take a lot of time. If we make any change in the code, then Webpack will create that file and save it to file system and then load it in the browser. So you will not see the changes reflected in the browser immediately. To avoid that issue, Webpack creates the bundle.js file, but it will not save the file. Instead, it will directly load the file from memory, which is better for performance reason. But if you want to see that file created, you can add another script in package.json file. Let's call it devbuild. And I will copy the start command. But I will not use the serve command, as I just want to create that file without serving to the browser. If I execute npm run devbuild command, you will see bundle.js file created in public folder along with other files. So all these files are served directly from memory instead of first saving to file system and then loading into the browser. But we don't need these files to run it locally, so I will delete them now. One more thing you need to remember is that we're using .env files, which I'm pushing to GitHub for your reference. But when you create your own .env files, you should add them in .gitignore files so that it will not be pushed to GitHub. So make sure to add entry of all the .env files in the .gitignore file, as you should not share it with anyone else. Every hosting provider like Netlify provides a way to add environment variables directly from the UI without the need of pushing it to GitHub. So you can click on Site Settings, scroll down to Environment Variables. Here, you can manually add those environment variables or import from the .env file. I will select Import from .env file and paste the contents of .env file. And click on Import Variables button to save them. So that's it for this video. If you found this series useful, do like the video and subscribe to the channel.